Hey, friends, and welcome to this week's live episode of Lead Your Movement. I'm Angelique Rewers, CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, and this is our weekly live show where we talk to entrepreneurs and business leaders who are using their platforms in order to drive positive change in the world so we can learn from them, the people who are actually out there doing it, getting things done, making a difference. We have an awesome show for you today. I'll give you a little spoiler. We're going to be talking about bringing spiritual into the corporate realm. And I think this is such a timely topic with everything that's going on in the world. If we don't go deeper in the way that we're trying to fix the issues that are going on inside of the workplace today, I think we are in for a world of hurt. So, we're going to be talking to one of the leading experts when it comes to that issue today. Before we get into the interview, though, I want to start by making two housekeeping announcements. The first is that if you are still struggling to figure out how to have conversations with business leaders out there, I don't care if you work with corporate or you work with universities, or you just want to work with any type of center of influence organization, association that's out there, you want to get that force multiplier of partnering up, teaming with, or working with or through a business organization, you want to join us this Thursday. We're going to do a 2-hour free training on Thursday on how to create an unstoppable machine of relationships, of prospects, of connections, of Rolodex building. And you can join us at thecorporateagent.com/unstoppable because that's what we want all of you guys to be, is unstoppable. So make sure you head over there and grab your spot. It's going to be an amazing 2 hours talking about the reality of what it's like to get in front of real, not just decision makers, but power players today. And we're going to show you a technique that you can use in order to do that. So that's where you go to register if you want to join us this Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern live. The other announcement I want to share with you is that, for the last several months, we've been teasing you with some footage from last year's Real Deal conference. And tickets are open. Registration is now open for the Real Deal 2021. It is the leading event for consultants, coaches, experts, speakers, professional service providers, and diverse business owners who want to win and work with corporate clients. And we are meeting in person. It is going to be a real conference in person in October in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, right on the beach. October, what is it, Vince? Maybe we can put up the dates in a minute here. 4th, 5th, and 6th, I believe. We replanned this event 3 different times last year because of COVID, and I have so many dates in my head. October 4th, 5th, and 6th in October on the beach, Fort Lauderdale. 3 amazing days. It is not a hybrid event. You heard me correctly. It is not a hybrid event. We don't believe in having straddled strategies or splitting ourselves between two different things and then doing neither one well. So we will be, thank you, Vince. Thank you. He had to type that very quickly. You have no idea what I just did to our producer asking him to do that. But Vince, thank you. And I appreciate that. And so we're going to be live in person, about 400 of us in the largest ballroom they have there. It's going to be amazing. It's time for us to get back to being in person, and that's what we're going to do. So right now, I think registration's like 83% off. If you're looking to join us, now would be the time to grab your seat before May 31st, when prices definitely go up on that registration. Okay, let's talk about today's episode. Let's talk about bringing spiritual back into the workplace and starting to go deeper than the surface level solutions that companies have been throwing at this problem for the last really the last 30 years, but especially the last 10 years. It's been all about workplace culture. That's all we ever hear about: leadership, engagement, workplace culture. But we're still not getting anywhere. Companies are literally spending hundreds of $billions a year in training and coaching and culture transformation efforts. And yet the numbers tell a very compelling story that employees are more stressed out and burned out than they've ever been. So, to help us have this conversation, I'm thrilled to have someone who I've known for quite a number of years now, someone who I admire very much, who always makes me remember how I need to show up, who's definitely influenced who I am and how I look at the way that I am connecting my body and soul and mind all together. So, our guest today is the amazing LeeAnn Mallorie, who is CEO of Guts and Grace Leadership, where she began her career as an executive coach at 26 years old, working with leaders and top teams from around the globe. Yet, she soon found something was missing: the body. She now helps leaders combat burnout and align with purpose by bridging the gap between the hard driving, logical mind, where I like to stay all the time, and the deeper wisdom of the soul. Her book, Guts and Grace, offers an unexpected doorway to greater power, ethics, influence, and impact at work. Oh my gosh, LeeAnn, it is like long overdue that we have you on Lead Your Movement. I'm so glad you are here.
Thanks, Angelique. It's awesome to be here. I'm glad we get to do this together.
I need you in my life more because every time I'm around you, it reminds me to get back into my body and back into my soul. So I'm spoiling it a little bit. But what is the movement that you're leading?
Angelique, there's a couple ways I talk about my movement. One, in very the concrete right now, what I'm up to is really helping to steward what I would call the evolution of business in a good way by helping women and diverse leaders bring their whole selves to work and bring their big ideas forward. And part of what I mean by that is over and over again, what I see in the workplaces that I work in and serve is that there are often people in the workplace who already have these threads of maybe the spiritual or something a little bit beyond what the workplace is already tracking inside of them, and they're seeing things. And yet we don't always necessarily invite them to the party, and or if we do, we're not really hearing everything that they have to say. So much of my work is really a movement around that kind of activation right now. And then at a deeper level, really the bigger picture movement is around bringing the body and frankly the feminine back online in the business sector and also the government sector. What that fuels, what I tend to see that fuels really is a different kind of thinking about innovation and also culture and transformation, that we're coming from a different place, that's a really body-centered, a deeper listening kind of place, and that makes a difference in terms of the kind of solutions that we tend to find.
You said some key words in there that really jumped out at me about bringing our whole selves to work. You know, that expression has been thrown around for a really long time. I remember when I worked in the defense sector, okay, which when I walked through the doors of that defense company every morning, I literally felt like I had stepped back into 1955. And I mean that, LeeAnn, I mean, there were literally still typewriters. There were forms that, you know, this was the early 2000s, and there were some forms we still had to type. And I'm not making that up, you guys. That is a like true story here. But I remember even then hearing that idea of, you know, bring your whole self to work, your true self to work. Except I felt like where that stopped was you can bring your whole self to work, just don't bring any of that spiritual crap in here. Like
For sure.
like leave your soul at the door, like literally, right? Leave your soul at the door, but you can bring everything else. So it was like kind of there was a little asterisk on it that said like, but spiritual souls excluded, right? When we see that. Do you think that's changed at all? Like, do you think that that's changing?
That I love the question. I mean, I think it's a really, I use it in part because I think it's edgy, and frankly, I don't think everybody that I'm friends with would agree with me that that's what we need to do. And here's what I mean by that. From a diversity perspective, there's often situations where not all of your whole self, excuse me, like you said, is necessarily going to be welcome or feel welcome or even be safe. At the same time, what keeps getting lost when we leave these parts of ourselves behind entirely? Well, one thing that happens is we go to work enough and we spend enough time at work that we actually start to forget them to some extent entirely. So over time, we start to build cultures that don't include these aspects of the deeper knowing or the deeper way we could think or feel. I do think it's changing. So I know we're going to talk about my movement and what's been like to lead this movement. I started this work in some ways 10, 15, even 20 years ago, depending upon how you count. And ultimately, I think now there's a lot more in certain sectors, in certain industries, in certain parts of the country or parts of the world. Like it's quite split. I live in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of folks who are talking the spiritual talk here on this coast, maybe not where I grew up on the East Coast in Pennsylvania to the same extent, right? It's very different in different sectors, different industries, different locations. But I do think in general, there's more and more of an opening towards what we might call the spiritual in the workplace. I think that this particular moment in time, well, on the heels of, still in the middle of in many ways, the COVID pandemic, people are starting to feel the loss of what has gotten left behind. And also, frankly, working from home and being in a context where all of the stuff we've compartmentalized has kind of come back in our faces all the time. It's like it's harder and harder to pull those things apart. And my personal belief is that that's not doing business good. Like that there's much evolution that we could create if we start bringing that stuff back in and in a safe way, right? In that moment for you, when you were trained in that particular kind of context, like it may not have been the easiest thing to do or even the right or safe thing to do, but much of what I'm holding a stand for is how do you do that in the right amount, in safe ways, in ways that don't just replicate the status quo or match the status quo, but help to forward the status quo. Because if we're talking about evolution or innovation or transformation or culture change, it's like we can't leave the stuff that would drive it out the door and think we're actually going to get there.
I'm not sure I've ever heard someone say quite the way that you said. And obviously, I consume a lot of information because you know me. I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone put it quite that way. That because we spend so much time at work, it actually is, it changes who we are. Like, that the idea that we're spending so much time tethered to work and sort of in that environment that it's really changing who we are. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to think about. And I'm not sure enough people are really talking about how that actually is changing who we are. I think there's an opportunity, personally, my opinion is there's an opportunity right now to change it in the other direction. So Ariana Huffington, who I think most of our viewers know who Ariana Huffington is, she said something really interesting this morning. I happened to catch it right when she posted it on LinkedIn, and I don't know if we have that, if we can put up that quote or not. I'm keeping Vince on his toes, our producer on his toes today. But Ariana Huffington made this interesting comment this morning on LinkedIn. She said, "We are in a once in a generation moment." And I think the choice of the word moment is very powerful because a moment doesn't last forever. Like it's a moment is sort of like that's a moment in time. It's not just we're not in just a period of time, right? We're in a once in a generation moment to redefine how we work and live, and how corporations show up for their people matters more than ever. And I think that is just like, for me, that idea that, how it shows how we're showing up right now, that companies have this moment in time. How do you, let's talk a little bit about how you help them make these changes and what they should be doing right now to seize this moment that Ariana is pointing out, that we actually have this great sort of global reset going on.
Totally. I want to, well, you know me, I'm going to go deep quick, but I want to talk a little bit about theory of change because I think it's related. So, what you said a moment ago around the like pulling up the idea that when we go to work frequently, then we're becoming something different, or it's influencing who we're being or how we are, who we are. Really, if I take an embodiment or a somatic standpoint, which is very much the work that I do, and we can talk more about the details of that, but essentially the experiences that we have shape who we are. They shape how we think. They shape the way that we physically sit in our own bodies. They shape the way that we move or don't move, the pace that we walk at, everything, right? And so being in a context where we go to work frequently, a lot of what my teachers will say is you're always practicing something, and then what you practice gets replicated and repracticed. So, as human beings and individuals, we go into the workplace, we're practicing not leaving ourselves, leaving parts of ourselves behind. We're practicing not listening to our bodies. We're practicing moving so fast that we've lost ourselves in certain ways. And we're practicing not listening to each other or to parts of ourselves. And over time, that just becomes comfortable and it starts to be like we're the fish in water and we forget we're doing that. Same thing for an organization or a system or even a country or it's like the micro of a human being replicates out of the macro of a collective or a system of human beings, let's say in a company culture. So at this moment in time, what we know about how human beings change and how essentially the body or our selves change is that a certain kind of moment of disruption is needed for something new to come forward. Otherwise, we just keep replicating the same thing. So, in embodied transformation, what you see is that we practice something that's based on what worked when we were young or what worked in our early careers, let's say. Over time, we practice that, and at some point, something gets disorganized. We lose a loved one, we get divorced, we lose a job, something happens, right? There's this transition. And then suddenly there's enough, like, the tension of maintaining the status quo is released enough that we can actually start to reach for something different because we don't have maybe the same ground to hold on to. And it's like, well, kind of like, why the heck not? But also, it's like we're in this messy middle. So for human beings and individuals right now, so many of us are going through that or have gone through that over this year. That what I see in my work, so I do a lot of coaching, for example, of women leaders, women execs, and also women on technical teams. And it's like everybody's going, hold on, like stuff got disrupted. The status quo isn't working anymore. What do I really care about? What's really my right role? What do I want to contribute here? What's the next thing that I could be doing that would have me feel more alive? And also, by the way, maybe I don't want to do it working 70 hours a week, for example, right? There may be ways I'm reevaluating that too. But in that disruption, there's something new that can come forward. And if we go back to what Arianna Huffington said, just to weave back to where you were, same thing for organizations, that this moment has disrupted so much about how we've been doing business that it's a very unique and right moment for us to actually go, what's next? What's beyond that? Is there something more that we want to become as a company? So, for example, I think there's a lot of conversations now going on about social impact or about what are we doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective, about environmental sustainability, some of these kinds of concerns that if we just stop doing what we're doing for a moment, we pick our heads up and we go, oh, this stuff actually matters. Like stuff's out of whack in terms of how we've been doing business and doing society and doing life. And then the part of us that just cares is like, oh, maybe there's a moment for that. Now, the risk, I think, to the point of what Arianna Huffington said also is we don't take this moment. Like what we also know about how a body changes or a human being changes is that you sort of get out of homeostasis. And then there's two things that can happen. You evolve, you actually reach for what's next, or you kind of like reach, it's like you're between the two trapeze and you're like swinging and it's like, okay, I'm about to let go. Or you go, wait, hold on, I'm going back. And then it's like, oh God, we just go back, we snap back to what was. So that will happen. Like that will happen for some of us. Some of our companies will do that. Some of us as individuals would do that. But I think now more than ever, there's a moment to go, let's reevaluate, let's reach for something different, let's pay attention, and let's use the disruption that maybe we wouldn't have invited to take the next step in some way.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I'm not sure anybody would say, yeah, we should, good thing this happened, right? I'm not sure anyone's going to say that. But I do think that, you know, really not a day goes by now where there's not an article looking at some element of how employees, some are just refusing to go back. They don't want to go back. They actually had this great pause, was sort of like, wait a second. I actually was sometimes we're just so busy and we're in the grind so much we don't even know how unhappy we are in the grind until we have a chance to step back and realize it. And then we're also seeing it's something around 27-28% of corporate employees are looking at changing roles because they realize, I don't want to work for this big company. This isn't working for me. And so you're seeing all of this. I wonder if this time, like there's a part of me, LeeAnn, that wonders if this time, because it's not isolated to one company or it's just not one person having the great reset. It wasn't like they ran into a health scare. For a lot of us, I was one of those where a health scare was sort of my wake up call. But then that just happens. Well, one person here, one person there. We've been
Mhm.
seeing a slow off ramp of women from the workplace over the last decade who do get burnt out. It takes a terrible toll. In fact, I know at least 5 people, like well in our velocity community, who had tremendous health scares, and then that's why they left corporate, was because their health got that bad. I feel like this time it's a little bit different because it's such a mass, it's just such numbers of people. But the other side of this is I think a lot of companies don't know what they should be doing. And I
Mhm.
say that, I share with you in the green room that there was this article that ran, it was about 3 weeks ago, from Tech Republic. And I'm going to see if I can grab the headline of it really quick. So Tech Republic, you guys, ran this article about 3 weeks ago, April 22nd. And the headline is Burned Out on Burnout. Burned out on burnout. Companies may be trying too hard to ease employee stress. Now, I think that title's a little misleading because I don't think companies are doing nearly enough. But the point of the article is that a lot of companies, LeeAnn, are throwing like virtual yoga, lunch and learns, virtual cocktail hours, happy hours at the end of the day where all the colleagues can like grab a whatever. The last thing we all probably need when we're stressed out is alcohol for our bodies, but grab a glass of wine and sit around with your colleagues. And they're doing these sort of check the box items on burnout, on stress, on creating a more holistic workplace. I don't think that's going to be your advice, is to do less. You probably are going to suggest that they do different.
100%. Um, I kind of like you alluded to, like, don't stop doing yoga. Please, that's great. It's a really good starting point. In fact, so part of what I do is I run a year-long, basically leadership intensive for female execs, and the first of the 12 or 13 modules that we do in that course really is around getting back in your body and just moving. Like, already it's a really good start to do something like have a yoga class or offer these opportunities. So I'm a huge fan of companies doing them. I practice yoga, I dance, I have a lot of deep movement practices that are part of my kind of doorway back into being in the body and to listening. And, the next layers of that work are really a different, like a different kind of listening or a different approach. So if what you're doing all day is overriding, meaning I'm going faster than my system can handle, I'm in meetings back to back every day. Like, we have a company culture that essentially um, drives overdrive, and then go take a yoga class. You're really just putting a band-aid on top of a systemic problem in terms of the way that we're working. So much of what I'm interested in from a company culture perspective is, what is it to actually start to train people more from a mindfulness or a kind of a deeper body wisdom way to pay attention to where those overrides may happen, and start to build cultures, build work days, build systems in such a way that are more human, that actually are conducive to the way a human body runs. How do we do that? I am much more work from individual leadership, and then creating nodes of folks who are practicing in different ways, leading to more nodes of folks who are practicing in different ways. So I don't necessarily I might partner with another collaborator who's going to work on your company systems, for example. But what I do is I'll work with a smaller group of leaders inside of an organization, whether it be the executive team or whether it be a group of women leaders. I do a lot of that kind of work under the Guts and Grace brand, or whether it be a group of high potentials, and go, let's actually support them to learn how to think this way, how to feel this way, how to be in their bodies in this way and make choices in this way. And what starts to happen is they get different results. They're not burning out. And then people go, wow, I want what they're having. Like, there's something about this different way of practicing where they are able to actually advance and maybe stay in the system longer than they would have before, or their innovation ideas start to get through, where they start to create culture changes or advocate for certain things because they've figured out how to do it from the inside out. So, for example, in our particular world, like right now, it was interesting last year. I think in some ways the work that I do can be seen as a nice to have, even though folks are burning out a little bit, like you said. Companies are like, great, let's just get the yoga instructor, like let's do the bare minimum thing. Now, as companies are starting to come back online and go, I think we're going to lose people if we don't do something more. I'm getting a lot more calls this year to go, how do we build something comprehensive here? What can we do for the folks we don't want to lose, to really keep them in the system? And we're starting to build things like high potential training programs where they're working with the tools of embodiment, working with these mindfulness tools, working with these practices to be able to both not burn themselves out and also forward what the company wants to forward from a bottom line and or an innovation perspective. So we're building comprehensive programs that are really addressing that question by teaching folks from the inside out how to lead in a different way, and then having that back influence the rest of the culture.
That's incredible. It's always been interesting to me. I'll just share with you. It's always been interesting to me, LeeAnn, that companies do create change in certain parts of their organization, and they're able to do that and yet not with people. And what I mean by that is, IT departments, when they're developing change and they're going to roll out a new system, it's always really interesting. They'll start by getting some super users into the new system and sort of using it, and kind of then being able to train other people how to do it, because they get those sort of super users into the system. They're good and trained up. They start liking the new system. So you start creating, from a change management perspective, basically a core group of believers, if you will. And then they start modeling the behavior for others. The marketing departments do this all the time with early adopters on their technology, and then using those early adopters on the technology to basically create ambassadors out there in the market and social proof and get people. And you're really the first person I've heard from a more of a culture, mindset, body, wellness, wholeness, holistic approach, to really kind of to really sort of talk about that. Because I think that companies just think, oh, we're just going to have this program, and if we build it, they will come. And the fact is, that's not how change ever happens in any other way inside of companies, but then they expect their culture change to happen that way. So I think that's kind of um, an interesting perspective that you're bringing to that.
Well, you know what else I'll say about that, and it touches what you were sharing around, bring in the yoga class, do the thing, is that I think still when it comes to that kind of change, we're looking for a quick fix. Like we're looking for, like we think that we can do a mass release. I'm not going to say don't do this, because I have friends, collaborators, people that I will also send my clients to that will help a company do this, right? We think that we can do like this much at a very broad level,
Mm.
and that people will change. But if, again, what we know about the human mind body operating system is that if we've been doing something for a long time a certain way, it's actually a deeper level change that's required to build a new habit or behavior at that level. So if we're talking about folks learning to, I know the word balance is, there's a lot of controversy around the word balance. Like it's not possible. Partly it's not possible because we haven't actually trained ourselves to be able to sense or feel or track, like we've forgotten. And then we can remember through practice what it means to really be on the edge or track that balance and then choose into it. So I always have found that working with smaller groups to be able to get to go deep, and then to be able to get a core group of users, if you will, to
Mhm.
be walking a new talk, to be practicing in a different way, and then creating ripples from there, tends to work. It takes a while. It takes longer. Like it's not what we want it to be, right? It's like, okay, that's a longer path to the outcome, but it's not a Band-Aid kind of outcome. It's really like a holistic outcome that changes something in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like, do you want to just feel good that you sent folks to a yoga class for the day, or do you actually want to create a permanent, lasting DNA level change in those folks? And it's any other change. Companies are willing to do that, and yet with their most expensive asset, their people, they somehow want to hit the easy button and then are aghast when it doesn't work. And I just think that's really, really interesting. I want to talk about some G words for a minute here. So, guts and grace, your book is also guts and grace. Um, I did a quick LinkedIn live earlier today and I messed up the name of your company as I was saying. And then afterwards, I was like, you know what? I'm not perfect. And so
Uh-huh.
and
And
my
any
dog
plus
was
is
like
good
trying
test,
to
right?
steal my sock. And my dog's like, she's like stealing my papers. And I'm like trying to do this LinkedIn live as she's biting my puppy's biting my toes. So, I'm human here. But what I said your company name was Grace and Glory. Grace
Mm,
and Glory. And I think because when I think about what you do for women and organizations, both, right? Women and then also organizations, I think of it about as bringing grace and getting the glory, as opposed to bringing the grit and getting the glory. And I think to me, like the end goal is like that glory, the glory of thriving mind, body, and spirit, the organization thriving. Like to me, that is the goal. That is the glory at the end. And so I said grace and glory. So I apologize for that. But I don't apologize for associating glory with you, because I do think that it's a very sort of glorious outcome when we are able to make this shift. And I feel like we really have reached a point where more grit isn't going to do it. So talk a little bit about how you feel about that word grit, and what your view is on that other G word.
um, I love talking about this. And it's interesting. I a couple of years ago went back to school, got a master's in positive psychology. So, all my positive psychology fans out there, grit is a big deal. It's a construct that we just love in the business sector in particular, and it's got a lot of upside. We have to be able to be determined, to stick, to follow through, to really like be passionate about something. Like there's so much good about grit. And in some ways, I think my entire brand, Guts and Grace, like, and is actually what the brand is about. And too much of anything can take us out of balance. Too much of anything can take us in the wrong direction. And my looking really has been that so much of corporate culture in particular, also other, we would say government culture too, and to some extent, but corporate culture in particular has really been built on grit and grit and grit your way through and more grit. And in some ways that really parallels if you talk about, like, we might say like a balance of masculine and feminine inside of organizations or in the world in general, like that there can be this tendency toward more is always better, pushing through, getting to the other side is always better. An alternative perspective, we might say, this idea of balance, which is so challenged and so hard to talk about right now. But so if I go back to even as early as Aristotle, there's a construct called phronesis, meaning basically the translation is practical wisdom. It's like the golden mean, the right amount of each thing. And we kind of, if we're all grit, ultimately there's something that's missing. And so at this moment in time, a lot of what I'm working on with folks is to really rehabilitate the capacity to be able to do both. To go, what's the other side of that conversation? Grit, and then grace is sort of the way that I talk about it, but it's kind of a tagline for everything from surrender, release, right? The things that we don't tend to like to do and, we shouldn't do, but sometimes we have to do, right? We could say like life and death is the same kind of polarity, the feminine, the masculine, that there's something around the other side of the coin that just doesn't really get taught enough or isn't really a part of that conversation enough. So, if you take a really simple example in business, it's like, at what point is it time to kill a certain idea or let it go or close a part of the business because it's actually not going to go anymore? Or at what point we go, okay, that was enough, actually. Like we've driven that to the point of we're making great revenue on it, and also now there's a point where it's become actually too much, or maybe there's a way that's not healthy for the entire market or the system in some way. We don't really ask those kinds of questions. I may get in trouble from people who might want to work with me for having those kind of conversations, but if we don't, what's the outcome, right? If we don't, we go, oh, we've overused our natural resources. If we don't, we go, are we sustainable in the way that we're living on this planet, for example? If we don't, we go, oh wow, we're burning out our employees. We have to be able to talk about both sides of that coin. And so while I love grit, and I would say there's ways that I'm a gritty person, I'm certainly a committed and a courageous person. I also think that being able to have conversations about and being able to have facility in our own practice of the other side of the coin, relaxing, letting go, stopping, calling enough, whatever these things are equally important and much less practiced, in particular in a business context. And I think in some ways, part of why many of the folks who are attracted to work with me are women in leadership. It's like, I think there's a way that women can end up being a bit the canary in the coal mine when that goes out of balance. So we go, like, I can't keep running that way. And then something shuts down in our bodies or something happens. And that begins to potentially start the conversation of coming back in the other direction. What would grace, what would look enough, what would letting go, what would some of these other things look like here if we can be open to it? And maybe, I don't know, but a global pandemic is kind of a moment of like everybody being asked into that, everybody being, like, let's all pause here. This isn't working. Something's off. And I live in California, so we've also had wildfires the last couple of years, that there's symptoms that then come forward when we're not practicing both sides of that coin. And in many ways, my work is really about drawing our attention back to that. And then like learning how to do that in a way that doesn't mean we can't do business or we can't be successful. Like, I don't think that's true at all. I just think we haven't learned how to do both and have that be what success is.
Yeah, I think the balance between the two is often missing. And I think there's a lot of companies that would also say, we actually need more grit. We need more guts. There are certainly folks who I think were in leadership positions this past year who found that certain teams out there didn't have the grit that they needed, right, to get through when, it's almost like you need that grit, especially when crisis hits. And crisis can hit in all sorts of ways in an organization. And then it's interesting on that grace side. I don't know. I'm trying to reflect back to some of the big decisions and rooms that I had to sit in where we were facing a big issue, like a really, really big issue at the corporate level. And I don't know that there was a lot of grace exhibited into the version you just explained in those conversations where people would step back, LeeAnn, and really ask the bigger questions like, is this a battle we should be fighting? Do we need to be looking at, like, is it time that something's laid to rest? Like,
Mhm.
is it, that's a really kind of interesting thing. I'm not sure enough C-suites are having those conversations. Really quick to Elizabeth, you may need to refresh. If you're watching us over on LinkedIn, sometimes LinkedIn's platform, you just kind of have to refresh. Now, she's probably not going to hear that from me because she's looping. Benny, it's good to see you here. And I love someone, LeeAnn is liking my twist on your company. So so maybe we can work grit and glory in there as well to guts and grace. So I want to talk about something that you're working on right now. Because you're doing something that's pretty interesting. You're working on an experience. It's primarily geared toward women, specifically who are really trying to drive forward bold initiatives inside their organizations on everything from either an environmental side of thing, sustainability, more socially conscious approaches to business. But you're not trying, you are doing something to support these women who are trying to affect change at a very sort of organic level inside their organizations. Talk a little bit of what you're working on right now inside your organization.
Yes, we are in the process of launching an experience. Could call it like a summit series, or basically it's a gathering. We're still deciding whether we call it a conference or not, because that has a certain number of connotations. It's not going to be that kind of thing, not like going somewhere and listening to people on a stage. Really, this is an experience that is going to be interactive and oriented around ultimately helping to fortify the body mind systems of the folks who are inside of larger organizations, really trying to lead a certain kind of change. So whether that be, in particular, we're going to focus a lot on sustainability this year, but over time, we'll also be looking at things like ethics and technology, things like social justice inside of organizations, really the bigger conversations that companies are needing to have right now. um, to capitalize, like we said at the beginning, on this particular juicy moment in time when something could really become different. And the event experience is going to be oriented around both looking at the inside transformation needed to be fortified to be able to do that work well, but also connecting and collaboration and learning from other folks who are in some ways like kind of like the meme inside of their own systems that is the seed for that kind of change. So often those are the kind of folks who tend to gravitate towards my work. And often it can be a lonely road. Like when you're the person who is holding the vision for something that's a few
Oh,
steps
yes.
beyond what the rest of
Oh,
the
yeah.
organization sees.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I feel like that's like, I mean, I don't like to speak in definitives, but I'd say almost all the time. It's a lonely road.
Because it is people who are in some ways leading a movement, right? And I think what I know from having walked the path of leading a movement around the body and embodiment and these kind of more feminine conversations inside of business is that it takes a while. It can be a lonely road. And then ultimately, having a tribe, being connected to people makes a difference. So really, it's intended to be a gathering of that particular sort. It is going to be invite only. It's exclusive. It's going to be a small group of folks really going deep together. So if you're listening and you're that person, you're like, oh, that's me. Yeah, feel free to get in touch with us about that because we're working on it for October.
That's amazing. I think that some of the best things I've ever done. I drove 8 hours once to get to the Catskills in New York for a women's retreat for women business leaders. That was a yoga retreat up in the Catskills. And I think I drove. I decided not to fly. I didn't want the like. I didn't want to deal with airports. I just wanted to clear my head. About 6 hours in, I started to regret my decision. But ultimately, I was glad that I drove there. And it was one of the most amazing experiences to just completely unplug for 3 days, and get back inside of my body, which I kind of want to sort of wrap up today talking a little bit about the importance of getting back into our body. I feel like the buzzword now is always mindset, mindset, mindset. And mindset is so important, LeeAnn. Mindfulness, mindset. But the body is what we live in 24/7. So talk a little bit about that, and what your advice is, especially to those of us who are go 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 all the time, on how to start getting back into our body, and the importance of that work.
That's a big question, and it's
It
very
is a
much
big
what the
question.
movement is about. Let's see what in a nutshell, what do I want to share here? I mean, since we met, that really, in some ways, again, the movement that I'm up to is about remembering, coming back into the body, being able to listen, being in touch in these ways. And to your point earlier about, this moment in time, like, is it more ripe? Is it easier? I think that's true. I think mindfulness has become a much more common word inside of organizations. And a lot of that really is a certain kind of stillness practice. For example, like a sitting practice is a lot of where that goes. Also, being able to work with the mind, hone the mind, refine the mind, work with mindset. Um, in my traditions, I would say those also, in some ways, are still more of a masculine practice. The body is, I back with the body with the feminine, and the body is more dangerous. It's more unpredictable. It's harder to control. We don't always know what it's going to do. It also carries our history. It carries, our DNA for one, but also the shaping from our past experiences, all of the things we've gone through in our early careers and our early lives. It doesn't always do what we want it to do. Sometimes it doesn't perform. Sometimes it gets sick. Sometimes it doesn't function. Like there's a lot of like, why would I want to be in the body, right? And yet again, from the perspective of being whole, really being able to bring our full selves to work, there's a lot of information that the body can provide. So from an advice perspective, in some ways, the most annoying and simplest advice is really the place to start, which is just listen. And that is a pretty loaded request sometimes, right? So if you live in a body where you have chronic pain, if you live in a body that carries trauma of some kind, if you live in a body that isn't doing what you want it to do, like you live in a body that shuts down when you're trying to say something important in a meeting, for example, which all of these things, I think different folks can relate to different pieces of this puzzle, right? It's like, I just wish that would go away. I just wish that would stop. I just wish that wasn't what was so. And yet, um, often the doorway to the next place of our evolution is in some way through the listening to that. So whether that be as simple as, okay, I have to pee, let me just leave my desk and like go to the bathroom for a minute and come back and go, wow, I actually feel better. Or to go, oh, so for example, when I started doing this work, I had chronic back pain. This is about, I don't know, it's 12, 13 years ago. I don't anymore. What I discovered within the first probably year of doing embodied leadership and like attention training around paying attention to the body is that I would constantly contract my stomach. I grew up in a family where women were supposed to be small and thin and look good and these kinds of things. And that holding in of the stomach, in my particular case, was leading to, it was like create a certain banding around my midsection and then led to this back pain. Now, letting the stomach out was a whole new practice. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants anybody to see their stomach, especially if you're a woman. Like, oh God, like it's a silly, I'm giving silly examples because it's like, it can sound kind of lofty, but it's actually pretty like practical, third dimensional, like annoyingly easy to access. But it's like to do it, like I would drive my car and go, okay, every time I get in my car, I'm driving, I'm going to relax my stomach. And it was like, it was hard as hell to do. And yet, over time in practicing that, what I found was not only did I feel more grounded because holding the belly in actually pulls you up in a certain way out of your root and out of your legs and out of your ground. So I settled in. I had more gravitas in a certain way in my presence, but also my back stopped hurting. And I was like, oh, okay, right. There's something there. So it can be sometimes really simple things, but it's like a whole different way of learning, thinking, paying attention that can open doorways to maybe feeling differently or even like a whole different kind of presence from a leadership perspective.
That's incredible. I actually am glad it was quite like, I mean, I don't know that it's a silly, but I actually am glad the example that you gave was something that I think a lot of people can relate to because of how they end up holding themselves even at work. If you even if you're crunched over all day instead of sitting up, the way that you are, and just what that does, the chain, there's a chain reaction is the thing, right? Because then people are on medication which is making them feel worse, which then gives headache or whatever it is, right? There's all of these chain reactions that happen. I wonder if, for organizations coming out of this, LeeAnn, and I know you have a never-ending ocean of organizations that really need your help today. I mean, I think that's the key. I wonder if one of the things that will come out of this pandemic is the understanding of really our biology as humans, because this is, as we come out of this pandemic, we're heading into the next decade of AI and automation and advanced technology that, like, it's really going to be quite an interesting next 10, 15 years as our humanity clashes right up against the next evolution of all this technology out there. And from a human perspective, we can't move that. Like, we're not robots. We're not robots. We do have to have time to hydrate and then use the bathroom. Like, that is something that's necessary for us. And I wonder and I hope that maybe we can learn some lessons and use this moment that Ariana Huffington is calling a once in a generation to figure that out. But I don't think we can do it without people like you out there leading your movement. I'm going to be honest. Um, I don't know that everyone really gets it inside of companies today, and you have your work cut out for you. How do you, for those who are starting to wake up to get really getting it and they want to create a much more human space, where their employees really can bring their whole selves, body, soul, and all into the workplace every morning, what do you want them to do to get in touch with you?
To get in touch, you're welcome to find us at gutsandgrace.com. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn and online, but also just try it. It's like don't take my word for it. Try it on for yourself.
Mm.
Meaning, there's two things. One, I would say, really challenge the belief that the body is going to get in the way.
Mm.
if that makes sense, right? That like there's a mindset shift that's actually almost like required to even be able to begin to do these kinds of practices or work or evolve in this way, which is um, maybe it's useful. Maybe there's something here. And when you speak about technology, it's like um, we could believe that, therefore, because robots don't have all those things, they're better or something like that, right? I'm not saying that folks believe that, but in some ways it can be like, that's better because they don't have to pause or go to the bathroom. So then the question I would have is like, okay, but what if this other thing that we have to contend with in our skin as humans has some other utility that we haven't fully measured or figured out what it's for yet, that's equally good or better, or that actually is worth listening to, worth paying attention to? And that's a big question. So then, like, the practice could simply be what if you pay attention to that in your own body and see what doorway that may open for you, right? It can become a very simple mindfulness or simple personal practice. It's like, if I follow that thread, where does it go? So, I mean, that's kind of like what I hope people will do from coming out of this conversation, is just start to play with it, see what happens.
That's $1 billion question that you've just asked. Not even $1 million question. That's $1 billion question. I think that's going to be one of the driving questions really over our lifetime, LeeAnn, as organizations are deciding whether or not to automate with, humanoid robots that
Yep.
never have to sleep, never have to
Yep.
eat. But what we're losing when we take the humanity out of certain things, and what the real cost of that is, and what if, and what is the real gift of who we are? I think that's an incredible question to ask. Maybe we'll have you back on with a couple of other folks, and we'll just explore that question at some point, because I think it's a really interesting one. It's a little heady, but for those of us who are sort of students of this generation, as we're going through it, I think it'd be a really interesting conversation. All right, so I'm going to put up your URL one more time with gutsandgrace.com. I'm going to encourage all of you out there, particularly women leaders out there who are relying tons and tons on grit and guts, to get with LeeAnn to work on the grace and the glory of it, because she's just absolutely amazing. And every time I spend even 3 minutes with her, it changes my perspective and gets me asking different questions. LeeAnn, you're just amazing. You're magical and amazing. And I'm so glad you're here. And
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to watch all of what you're going to be doing over the next year and beyond. So thank you for being here.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me, Angelique.
Absolutely. All right, you guys. So we will be back next Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern with another discussion about folks who are doing big things out there and really using their business to drive positive change in the world. Make sure that you come and join us in October at The Real Deal, October 4th, 5th, and 6th, in person, in your body, at The Real Deal physically. Tickets are on sale now. Registrations are open at the priority access level, so you can register for 83% off of where it will be. So do that now, between now and May 31st. If you're going to join us, it's a great time to make that decision and then come and be there physically in person with us. Until then, this is Angelique signing off. I'll see you guys next Wednesday.